It all started with a property line. I wish I could say it ended there. Karen Davis, my next-door neighbor and self-appointed queen of our HOA, had a habit of making up her own rules. Most people just ignored her, but I made the mistake of standing my ground. There was a narrow easement between our properties, a grassy stretch of land that led to a small creek. That creek ran behind both our homes, and technically it was accessible to both of us. I used it to fish, walk my dog, and keep bees near the edge where the wildflowers grew best. One day, I came home to find orange flags staked into the ground along the easement. Karen was in her yard, arms crossed, watching me. I walked over to see what she was doing. She told me she was reclaiming the land and that it was no longer public use. Her voice was calm, but her words were loaded. She said the HOA had voted to make it a private buffer zone. That was news to me. I asked for documentation. She said I'd receive it in the mail. 2 days later, I got a letter not from the HOA board but from Karen personally, claiming the easement was no longer accessible because of security concerns. I replied the right way. I printed out my deed, highlighted the easement rights, and gave her a copy. I even brought a copy to the HOA office. But the very next morning, she started building a fence. Not just any fence, she was putting up posts right through the easement, cutting off my access to the creek entirely. It was early, around 7 a.m., and I saw 2 hired workers unloading wooden panels from a trailer. I asked them who had authorized the build. They pointed to Karen. I tried to stay calm. I told her again that the land was shared and she couldn't block my access. She rolled her eyes and said, "Call someone who cares." So I did. I called the sheriff's office. Deputy Rogers arrived about 45 minutes later. He was no nonsense and quick on his feet. I handed him the deed, showed him the easement section, and even walked him down to the creek. Karen came storming out in her robe, holding a clipboard like it was a court order. She tried to argue, but Rogers stopped her mid-sentence and asked if she had any legal proof. She didn't. He turned to her and said, "Ma'am, I suggest you leave this man's property and stop the construction immediately." I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Karen didn't back down. She didn't apologize. She just smiled, turned around, and went back inside. Something in her eyes told me this was just the beginning. 2 weeks later, things got worse. I came home one evening after a long day and something felt off. The back gate was open and my dog Pixel wasn't at the fence like usual. That's when I noticed the tire tracks, deep, muddy, and fresh, leading down the path toward the creek. My heart sank. I followed the trail and saw what used to be my fence, cut in 3 places like someone had taken bolt cutters to it. One of my beehives had been knocked over, its wooden frames crushed and scattered like debris. Honey leaked out onto the grass, drawing bees into a frenzy. And then I heard it. A sharp yelp. Pixel had stepped on something near the fence line. When I ran over, I found a rusted nailboard, nails facing up, half buried in the dirt. Someone had placed it there on purpose. He limped back toward me, his paw bleeding. The vet gave him antibiotics and told me to keep the wound clean. But I wasn't just angry anymore. I was done playing defense. That same night, I installed 4 motion sensor cameras, not the cheap kind, the kind that sent live alerts to my phone every 10 seconds until I muted them. I wanted proof. I also called in Nora Beltran, a licensed surveyor. Nora didn't play games. She marked every corner of my property with neon orange stakes and put up laminated signs that said, Survey monuments, tampering is a criminal offense. 3 nights later, my phone buzzed at 1:13 a.m. The camera had caught movement near the back lots. I tapped the live feed. 2 figures in hoodies were moving through the tall grass. One of them was pulling out the survey stakes and tossing them into the creek. The other one carried a pair of bolt cutters. I couldn't see his face clearly, but just as he turned, the moonlight hit him. Chandler. I recognized him right away. Local guy, always getting into trouble. Deputy Rogers had mentioned him before. The second person didn't need an introduction. Even under the hoodie, I could see the platinum blonde hair. Karen. I called Rogers and sent him the footage. He didn't waste time. By sunrise, he had a warrant signed for criminal mischief and trespassing. Later that morning, Rogers and 2 deputies knocked on Chandler's door. Bodycam footage would later show Chandler answering the door in pajama pants, insisting he'd been asleep all night. Rogers pulled out a printed photo taken from my camera showing Chandler mid-step, holding bolt cutters like a trophy. Chandler shut up immediately. When they searched Karen's garage, they found everything. The missing survey stakes, Nora's laminated placards, and a half-empty spray paint can, the same green color used to vandalize my no trespassing signs the week before. Karen claimed she had no idea Chandler stored those things in her garage. But Rogers wasn't buying it. Then explain why your fingerprints are all over the stakes, he said. She didn't have an answer. Both of them were arrested and taken to county jail. Karen made bail before lunchtime. Chandler didn't. Turns out he was already on probation for a check kiting scheme from 2021. That meant no bond until further review. Karen probably thought the story would end there. But what she didn't realize was this was just the beginning. While Chandler sat in jail, things started unraveling fast. My lawyer, Elliot, wasted no time. He filed a motion to subpoena the HOA's financial records, specifically any recent purchases involving fencing, construction, or property modifications. The court granted it, and within a week we had documents in hand. That's when the real story came out. We found a cashier's check for $3,500 used to purchase the illegal gate Karen had installed across my driveway. The name on the check: Chandler. But the account it was drawn from wasn't his personal bank. It was the HOA's reserve fund. Elliot and I sat there staring at the paper. Why would Chandler pay for the gate using HOA money? I asked. We kept digging, and what we uncovered was worse than I expected. Chandler had written multiple checks, more than $46,900 for what he labeled as grounds improvements. But no one in the neighborhood had seen a single improvement, no new landscaping, no sidewalk repairs, nothing. He was embezzling. The HOA board, already embarrassed by Karen's actions, was horrified. They called an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to press charges against Chandler. That's when Detective Miriam Page from the county's white-collar crimes unit got involved. And let me tell you, she didn't miss a thing. She showed up with a search warrant for Chandler's home office. They took his laptop, hard drives, and even his printer. Within a few days, Miriam found everything. Forged invoices, fake meeting minutes, and a Word template labeled HOA stamp final, used to create the neon green approval stamps Chandler printed on bogus documents. But that wasn't all. Some of the grounds improvement money had been funneled into Karen's private bank account. We traced $6,000 labeled as consulting fees. Consulting for what? Karen didn't say, because the moment she learned she was under investigation, she lawyered up. Her attorney, James Hall, was one of those no-nonsense types. He charged $600 an hour and responded to every question with, "My client has no comment at this time." But Chandler, he wasn't so quiet. Facing prison time and a probation violation, he started talking. He agreed to a full confession in exchange for a plea deal, and part of that deal included testifying against Karen. In his signed statement, Chandler said Karen had promised him a piece of my land after the HOA annexed it. She told him the gate was just the first step. Chandler handled the paperwork, the checks, even the stake pulling. In return, she promised he could build a shed on his half once the deal went through. Karen, meanwhile, denied everything, but the paper trail didn't lie. The documents Chandler forged matched the fake HOA approval letter Karen had mailed to me weeks earlier. The language was the same, the formatting, even the header font. It all connected. By now, the community was buzzing. Everyone had heard bits and pieces, but the real bombshell came when the local newspaper picked up the story. The headline read, "HOA treasurer and president linked to land grab scheme." Neighbors started demanding answers. Some even held a protest at the HOA office, holding up signs like, "Where's our money? HOA not equal to personal bank account. Fire Karen now." And just like that, the tide turned. The HOA board removed Karen from her position as president. She didn't even show up to the vote, just sent a resignation email with no apology, no explanation, just one line. "Due to personal matters, I am stepping down." Elliot filed a civil suit against both Chandler and Karen on my behalf for trespassing, property damage, and emotional distress. The judge approved the suit and a court date was set. But even before the hearing, there were small victories. The sheriff's department returned my survey stakes. Pixel's paw healed completely. The bees rebuilt their hive stronger than ever. And every time I walked past that half-finished gate Karen installed, I smiled. It stood there, crooked and rusted, like a monument to her failure. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The legal battle was just beginning, and Karen was about to find out that stealing land isn't just petty. It's a felony. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as the trial began. Everyone in town seemed to be there, neighbors, HOA members, even former friends of Karen who now sat far away from her on the bench. Chandler was the first to take the stand. Wearing a plain orange jumpsuit and shackled at the wrists, he told the court everything. He didn't try to look innocent, he didn't even look up, but his words were crystal clear. He said Karen had planned the whole thing, the fake documents, the gate, even the late-night sabotage. She had told him the HOA would eventually claim my land if enough improvements were made and if I didn't comply. She promised him a shed, part of the creek, and even a small garden plot on my property. In exchange, Chandler handled the dirty work, cutting fences, faking receipts, rerouting HOA funds. Then the prosecutor played the security footage. It was short, maybe 20 seconds, but it said everything. Karen and Chandler loading rebar and spray paint cans into her SUV at 12:47, the same night my survey stakes were ripped out. Karen wore a hoodie pulled halfway up, but her platinum blonde hair stuck out just enough. And when the camera caught her face in the moonlight, the jury looked stunned. She never said a word during the trial. Her lawyer did all the talking, arguing Karen was manipulated by Chandler and unaware of his actions. But nobody believed it. After 3 days of testimony, the jury returned in just 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Karen and Chandler were both convicted of felony conspiracy, theft, criminal mischief, and trespassing. The judge revoked Karen's bond immediately. Karen got 18 months in prison, plus $32,000 in restitution to me for property damage and emotional distress, and $46,900 back to the HOA. She also got a 5-year no-contact order. Chandler got 4 years with the possibility of parole in 2, only because he cooperated fully. As they were taken away, I finally looked Karen in the eyes. She looked away. I didn't feel hate, just relief. Later that week, Elliot handed me a check from the state's Victim Restitution Fund, $500, meant to help rebuild my beehives and repair the damaged fencing. And the sheriff's office dropped off the last of my returned property, including the laminated survey placards Chandler had tossed into the creek. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. With the legal mess behind me, I took on something new, something that had once been a source of stress but now felt like an opportunity. Where Karen once tried to steal land, I started building. I cleared the area, dug fresh soil, and laid the foundation for a greenhouse, right where the illegal gate had once stood. I planted heirloom tomatoes, basil, and strawberries. I put in solar-powered garden lights and strung up wind chimes that sang whenever the breeze rolled through. Pixel, my loyal dog, finally stopped flinching near the gate. He'd run laps around the new greenhouse and then flop in the sun. And the bees, they were thriving, more active and productive than ever. The gate that once symbolized control and lies was gone. In its place stood hope. And while the fight had taken months of my life and more energy than I thought I had, something good finally started to grow again. After the trial, things began to settle like dust after a long storm. The HOA, now under brand new leadership, sent me a formal apology letter signed by every new board member. It came with a check for $4,500, money recovered from Chandler's frozen accounts, meant to repair the beehives and cover part of the damage they had overlooked for far too long. I didn't ask for an apology, but it meant something. I cashed the check and reinvested every dollar back into the land Karen had once tried to claim. I built raised beds for vegetables and pollinators, added a small pond fed by the creek, and even restored the part of the trail she had tried to block with her illegal fence. That patch of dirt she had fenced off, that was now the home of a new greenhouse filled with tomato starts, basil, and native flowers to support the bee colonies. The once hostile corner of my land was now alive with color and movement, sunflowers stretching tall, bees drifting from bloom to bloom, Pixel lounging in the sun like a little king on his own land. And for the first time in months, the neighbors weren't whispering about court cases or arrests. They were dropping by to admire the garden, to ask for cuttings, to help water the beds. One woman brought over homemade muffins. Another offered to trade me lemon balm for fresh cucumbers. The HOA president, a younger guy named Malik, even came by with a rake and gloves and helped me clear the last bit of brush near the creek. "I want this neighborhood to feel like home again," he told me. And for the first time, I believed him. The land was mine, always had been, but now it felt like it. It smelled of fresh soil and second chances. It buzzed with bees and laughter. The past had been full of lies and broken fences, but the future was wide open. And just when I thought the chapter had closed, I got a letter in the mail. Another name I didn't recognize, another person claiming they had rights to my land. But this time I was ready. About a year after the dust had finally settled, another envelope showed up in my mailbox. No return address, just a clean, cream-colored envelope with my name printed neatly across the front. Inside was a letter from Elaine Castor, someone I had never heard of before. She claimed to be Karen's cousin and her legal next of kin. According to her, Karen had granted her a private right-of-way across my land in her final weeks before being taken into custody. Elaine said she intended to honor Karen's last wishes and requested access to a path that cut directly through my property to the creek. I almost laughed. It was another power move, one last desperate attempt to dig up conflict from the grave. But I didn't get mad. I just forwarded the letter to Elliot, my lawyer, and got back to watering my basil. A week later, Elliot called. "The deed's a forgery," he said. "Sloppy, too. Fonts don't match. The notary stamp expired in 2019. We filed a response with the court. Elaine withdrew her claim before the hearing even began. That little scare reminded me how far I'd come and how ready I was to handle anything now. I didn't just know my rights. I had the documents, the survey markers, and the experience to protect them. That spring, something else unexpected happened. A restitution check came in from the state's crime victim fund. Turns out a portion of Karen's prison wages, about $58 a month, was being garnished and sent to me. It wasn't much, but the symbolism meant everything. And then came the most surprising part of all. A letter from Chandler. He had finished a paralegal certificate in prison and wanted to apologize. The letter was handwritten, no excuses, no begging, just a quiet acknowledgement of everything he'd done and the damage he caused. He even enclosed a hand-drawn map with suggestions for how to expand my orchard and improve bee traffic flow with rows of pollinators. I didn't know what to feel, but after reading it twice, I wrote back. I told him the bees were thriving, the sunflowers were taller than ever, and Pixel still barked at the wind like he owned the place. No promises, no forgiveness yet, but something close. Because sometimes, even after everything, things come full circle. It's funny how the land you fight for ends up giving back to you in ways you never expect. One crisp morning in early spring, I got a call from a nonprofit called Sprout Tomorrow. They had just acquired the plot of land that used to be Karen's. The irony wasn't lost on me. They wanted to turn it into a community garden and native pollinator sanctuary. They asked if I'd be willing to consult me, the guy Karen tried to fence out of his own driveway. I said yes. The first volunteer day was surreal. I brought my brush cutter, a few rakes, and a thermos of coffee. Deputy Rogers showed up in work boots and gloves. So did Malik, the new HOA president, and a handful of new neighbors I hadn't even met before. We pulled weeds where Karen once planted surveillance cameras. We laid compost where her keep out signs used to hang. The land buzzed not just with bees but with laughter, conversation, and the clatter of garden tools. They planted rows of heirloom tomatoes, lavender, milkweed, and bee balm, all native, all meant to bring life back to the soil and air. By noon, Karen's old lawn looked like a scene out of a postcard. I stood at the edge of the property and watched it all. That plot of land, once used to intimidate, divide, and claim control, was now being shared, cultivated, and loved. There were no fences, no gates, just raised beds, wooden markers, and rows of seedlings reaching toward the sun. One volunteer handed me a small wooden sign to place in the dirt. It read, "Pollinators Welcome." I smiled and stuck it right where Karen used to park her SUV. Later, as the day wrapped up, a little girl with muddy knees and a dandelion crown came over and handed me a tomato start. "This one's yours," she said. "You should plant it in the sunniest spot." I didn't know how to explain the feeling I had in that moment. Maybe it was closure, maybe it was just peace. But I knew this for sure: what once was a battleground was now a garden. And sometimes, victory looks like quiet joy, fresh soil, and a tomato plant handed to you by a child. By October, Sprout Tomorrow held its first harvest dinner, showcasing produce grown from the very land Karen had once tried to control. The menu was simple but rich with meaning: roasted butternut squash, garlic honey carrots, and heirloom tomato bruschetta, all from the garden just outside my door. It felt surreal to sit at that long wooden table with neighbors, new and old, eating dishes made from the soil I had once fought to protect. I even got a nod of recognition for my role in the whole ordeal, but I didn't need the attention. The real victory wasn't in the applause. It was in the smiles, the laughter, and the sense of community that filled the air. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over the garden, I thought back to all the struggles, the conflict, and the long road to get here. The bitterness, the fights, the confusion, it had all led to this moment of peace. I had fought for my land, my rights, and my peace of mind, and now I had both. I looked over at Pixel, happily running through the fields, and I realized we'd both found our peace. There were no more looming threats, no more fences to tear down, just wide open land, a thriving garden, and the gentle hum of bees on a sunny afternoon. And with that, I realized that no matter what Karen had tried to take from me, she couldn't take the future. The land was mine, and it would always be more than just dirt. It would be home.